All right, good evening, everybody, and welcome to today's session. So today we're going to be continuing from where we stopped on Monday. So on Monday we talked about design systems, talked about atomic designs, talked about components, right? Then we started, we reviewed some design systems. We looked at the carbon design system for IBM. We talked about material design system for Google and human guidelines for iOS, right? So I gave us a attached some links to guys. I also got to figure out and see what we can access some of these languages and implement into work. Right. So then we also try to visualize the concept of design, right? Where I said this all right, sorry about that. Let me share my screen again. All right, so okay, please confirm you can hear me clearly and you can see my screen. I'm sorry, my network is not very good this evening. Right, Ijoma, please confirm you can hear me.
Yeah, loud and clear.
Okay, all right, thank you. Start the recording, please.
It's still recording. Continue.
All right. All right, so where I stopped, we talked about atoms. We tried to visualize atomic design, the concepts we talked about in our last class. We brought in some icons, a few text and buttons. So using the concept of atomic design, these are atoms, right? And when we try to bring them together, we're trying to create a molecule um, in our design system. Okay, so this is what we ended up with before we had to end our previous class. So today we're going to complete this um this visualization of atomic design. Then we're also going to try and create our own design system. Most times when you're creating an application or you're trying to build something, we usually you might import an existing design system, probably material tree or human guidelines or ant design system, just anyone you think is the best fit for the digital product you are designing, right? But it's still best to know how to create it on your own. Like I said before, there are some people that their job they create design systems. They do not work on screens in isolation, but they create systems for designing. So we're going to work with typography, color, input fields, buttons, shadows, checkboxes and radio buttons, spacing and grid. So these are just the essential elements, right? Your design system can encompass a lot more than this. You can design your cards and design a lot more and include it into your design system. Just remember that a design system is for your reusable components. So as long as something is reusable, something you use over and over and over again in your design, you should you should add it to your design system. So like now your navigation, your nav bar or your sidebar or whatever type of navigation you're using would be in your design system, right? So trying to complete this, right? So okay, so now I grouped all this 1, 2, 3, 4 and put them in an auto layout. So I've been talking about auto layouts over and over and over again. The concept is a smart type of grouping that can be done in Figma, right? So when I added them in an auto layout, you can see that I can see if you look closely, we're going to see the spacing between the element and its background. That's the padding rather. So you have 16 pixels here, you have 16 pixels, and you have 16 up here and 16 down here, right? So if you also go to the properties panel, you're also going to see 16 here. Go to auto layouts, you see the width, your height, um, the spacing, you need to also see the padding. Right, so I can make this 32, and I'm going to make this 32. Right, so if you notice, um, as I'm increasing the padding, the content inside my auto layout is adjusting to the padding I'm creating, right? That's because the setting of the auto layout is currently set to fixed width. So that it means that no matter the padding or the spacing I give this element, the width should be 206. Okay, so I can make my spacing 8, my padding 8 instead, but my width is still 206. The width is fixed. So this is the width here. So but if I make this to hog content, right, it's going to hog the content of the elements inside it. So for success now, if I make success hog content, it's going to hog the text success. Same thing with this one. I make this, I go to the width and make it hog content. It's going to hog the content, the full width of the content, right? So yeah, so now this is 8 pixels. I can increase this to 16. Okay. Let me just do this at once. So 16, right? So now if you notice, if I want to adjust my spacing, this is 8 pixels, 8 pixels, 8 pixels, and I make it 16. The 16 is adjusting from all ends, adjusting from the spacing here, spacing here, spacing here. But if I want to ensure that I'm communicating the proper visual hierarchy in this card, right? So I want my sources and the stop text to be together, to be closer to themselves than the button and to the icon, right? What I can do now is I'm going to click on the sources and I'm going to click on the text under it using Shift to select both of them. I'm going to click on Shift A. So Shift A, like I've said, is the shortcut for auto layout, right? So now I just created an auto layout inside an auto layout. So it's basically like a group inside a group. Everything is grouped, but this group is now closer or is now more grouped rather. So I need to make this 8, right? Make this 8, and I'm going to reduce this to 24. Okay. All right, so this is what the card is looking like. I'm going to bring this back to 24. Right. So I can enlarge my icon if I choose to do. So clicking on K means to scale, like I've said before. So it means to resize from all ends. So it's currently at 30, 28. I'm going to make this 40. I want it to be a bit bolder. 40 is okay. Right now, so this is the card I've created using this atoms, right? Atoms from previously. So now, in considering that this is a component we are creating, remember it's something that we want to reuse, right? And we created a card for alerts, right? So this is basically saying success, you did it, I'm proud of you. So this and is you're giving your users an information, you're informing them of something. Probably they submitted something or they did something, right? So you're informing them that this was a success, right? It happened. So there are different information you can be passing to your users. The sources, it could be error, it could just be neutral, just be informational. So there are different use cases, but you probably be using the same components. So that's like I said before in our previous class, that's where components come into play when it is reusable. Right. So as this same card is right, you can also have the one for right, so you can see that they are sending different messages, but they are using very similar component style. So for things like this, we create components for them. That's why I talked about things we reuse over and over and over again, such as typography and the colors, right? Now, to create a component, like I was saying before, that as a component itself is a feature on Figma itself. So right now, when you click on, you go to your properties panel again, and you go to just just right beside the name of the frame you're selecting or the element you're selecting, you're going to see an icon that says create component. Once you click on create components, right, it changes to purple. So I'm going to rename this alert icon, right? And now for the purpose of an element being a component, it means it is reusable. It's going to have different instances of its use. It's going to have different variants. Right, so I'm going to click on add variant. It still is in the same place the component icon was before. When I click on add variant now, it creates another variant of the same icon. So we talked about this when we were doing prototyping, so we might be familiar with this. So I'm going to create a variant and I'm going to change the color of this to red. Right. Okay. Change the color of this to red. I'm going to create another variant. I can either click on Control D. So if I click on Control D, it's going to create another variant in that component set already because it's already in a component. So anything I'm duplicating in this component would be a variant of that component, right? So now I'm going to create another one and I'm going to give it a green color. All right, so this is green, maybe a bit darker. All right, this is fair. Right, so now I'll click on the component and I'm going to go to my properties panel again. I'm going to see property. right? I'm going to click on the first one. So if said property, I'm going to say state, or I can say use case. So use case is what? This is default or rather neutral. So this is a neutral alert icon. And if I click on this one is an error. I'm going to rename this to error. I'm going to rename this to success, right? So if you can see, so we have created a component set, right, that has an icon for neutral, for error, and for success, right? So now imagine if I take out one of this. So if I take out one of them and I'm using them in my design and I decide I want to create an error message, right? But I'm still going to use the same icon. I want to give an information about an error. So I can simply come to this is for now, this is the neutral use case of this icon. If I go to my properties panel, I'm going to see use case, I'm going to see neutral. If I click on the drop down, I'm going to see error and sources, right? So this has created a variant, different variants of the same element, the same icon. So if I click on error, it gives me the error variant. If I click on sources, it gives me the sources variant, right? So now this is your parent icon. This is your parent component. This is the original one, and this is a variant of it. Right? So now I'm going to, this is green, and this is green that I want. I'm going to click on Control C to copy this, and I'm going to paste it in here. Alright, so an easy way to paste, like I want to paste it in place of, I want it to replace this icon here. So I'm just going to click on Control Shift R. I'm going to replace it directly, Control Shift R. So that's it's just replaced it like that, as easy as that. Then I'm going to also click on this Control C, click on this in here and Control Shift R2. But I want the error one, so I'm going to come here and I'm going to change it to error. Right, so that is red. Okay. So now the next thing is the sources, same thing, sources and error, all that. So we can just try to change the color of this. Go to colors. I'm going to change the color to green. All right, unless it's too. Okay. Let's leave it as white because green does not work with that background. Now for our buttons, right? So for buttons, we can also do the same thing for our button. So your button can have different states. But for this for the sake of this example, I'm just going to create an arrow and a success button. Right. So just same thing as before. We need to make this a variant. So now once it's a component rather, the color of the frame becomes purple. That's the easiest way to spot a component in a design file. I'm going to rename this to components. Button rather. Okay. So I'm going to click on add a variant. I'm going to click on add another, okay? I'm going to duplicate again. All right, so this is the default button. Then I'm going to change this to arrow and give it the color red. I'm going to go to the fill, copy this, and you can zoom in as much as you want to copy the red color. So I picked the color picker to get this red color, okay? Then I'm going to go here, I'm going to pick the green color. Now, so I'm going to copy this. I'm going to copy one of the buttons. see, I'm going to click here and Control Shift R as space to replace. I'm going to change the text to button, continue. Right. I'm going to also take this button to Control C. I'm going to go here, Control Shift R. Right. So if you notice now in the component, so this is currently default. This should be error. Okay, so this is error, and this is should be success. I'm going to rename this to success. Okay, so I'm going to come here and I'm going to change this to error because this is the error button we need here. I'm going to change the text to true cancel. Right. Okay, so we can change the background so our text is a little bit more detailed. I'm going to change the background. Something like this. Right, so this is just a simple example of how the error message can look like, right? Yeah, so this is just so one thing about components is that it's universal. So if I come here, so this is the mother component, right? You have the mother and the parent, like I've been saying before. If I come to this button color here and I change it to, let's say, yellow, right? It's going to change every single instance of it in the design. So now this color has changed. We click on Control Z to remove that. So that is how using components works, right? That's how we create components that are reusable and are universal. So this is very helpful. Let's say you're designing for a huge platform. You have used a particular color, you have used a particular font or font size, or you have used a particular icon in a lot of screens, right? So you can easily go to the parent instance or the parent component and change it there, and it reflects everywhere else. So even if when you click on this, so this is a component. Once you click on this more actions here, you're going to see which changes to main component. So this is the main component, right? This is the detach instance. This is the reset instance. This is another create another component on it. Right? So that is how we use components universally, right? So this is very helpful when you're creating your design systems because, like I said, your creating design systems is a collection of reusable components. So it's universal. You're something you're going to be using over and over again. So you need to have a way to control it, control change, to make changes that affect a lot of things, right? So like we talked about material tree design and how Google uses material tree design system for their project now. So let's say if, for example, they decide we do not want to go with this color and they want to change the shade of their blue, or they want to change the size of a particular typography or a heading. So instead of going to every single screen where that color, that blue color has been used, they can simply go to the main component, the main color component, right? and change it there, and it's going to reflect in all screens like that. That's how universal it is, right? Right, so now starting the design system properly, there are some plugins that would help you. Now for skills, we can simply come to the more options, go to plugin and widgets and type in type skills. So this is going to help you generate multiple. You're going to generate a type system for you very easily. Remember, we are working with um six an 8 point system, right? So if you have, let's say, oh, we're working with a 4 point system. So if you have 4 pixels text, next one should be 8 pixels, or 12 pixels, 16 pixels, 20, 24, 34. So it's going to be constant like that, consistent, right? So this type skill can help you create your design system. So before we get to that, let's talk about how to create it manually by yourself. So now, what's how we simply do that using styles. And so this is where we're going to introduce ourselves to the concept of styles, right? So while we're working on the fitness application, we created some styles. I'm not sure if we were aware when we were doing it, but we did create some styles. So this is text styles. This is your color styles that we created when we used the foundation color generation. So simply, if you want to create a style, you can either come here. This is your styles, and you click on. So you can create a style for text, for color, for effect, and for layout guide. Okay, so this is this text that we're currently on. That's typography. So now let's say I want to use my font system is Poppins, right? I want to use Poppins. So let me just write a small text. All right. So now this is a text that I just created random. If you go to the typography, you're going to see Open Sans. That is the font system, but I want this to be Poppins. Right, so I'm going to make this Poppins. I'm going to make this regular. I'm going to make the font size 64. Right, so now we're starting from 64. Right, so now this is the line height and the letter spacing. Right, so usually we can go with a line height of 120. Okay. Usually the best, especially for Poppins, 120 percentage for your line height, right? So now I have I've gotten this is my typography, this is my text. So this is Poppins with a thickness of regular and a font size of 64 with line spacing of 120% and letter spacing of 0%, right? Now, if I want to create a style out of this, I want to ensure that I want this to be one of my, what to be in my design system. I want to save it in my design system. What I can do is to create a style out of it. Right, so let me just, wait, let me, I'm going to make this 48, also regular. I'm going to make this 32 or 36. Now this is for my display text, right? So usually in typography, like I've said before, you might have your there's your paragraph text. That's usually for the one for the little paragraphs. You have your display text. You have your headings text. You also have your captions and your small labels. Right. So for my display text now, I said I have decided that my maximum is going to be 64. Then I might have 48 and 36. So display text are usually big and bold, right? They're the biggest text on your screen, on whether it be the hero screen or your onboarding screen. They are the biggest text there. So I'm selecting this. So I'm going to click here. So once you click um on this icon next to your typography, you're going to see text styles. And so I'm going to click on plus. So now I'm trying to create a style. I'm making this text with this setting a style so that anywhere I want this text to be, I can simply grab on that style. So it's similar to creating a component, right? So that you can easily reach for that. Like you can easily take it from your warehouse. Remember, we are creating a design system, basically the warehouse of your design project, right? So now I'm going to create a text style. So now this text should be display large. So I created three different sizes for our display text. I created the large, the medium, small. So this is display large. Hmm. I'm going to put display here. And so now what I just did now is I created a text style display large under a folder called display. That is what this did for me. So I'm going to click on create style, right? So now I'm going to see that when we click on this text, what comes up here is no longer, we're no longer seeing the individual font, the individual letter spacing or the size. What we're seeing there is the text style. That is the style that is being reflected in this typography we currently selected. I'm just going to do the same thing for this. I'm going to create a style out of it. Click display. So this forward slash ensures that we are creating a folder in display, right? So this will now be display medium. I'm going to go do the same thing for this. So it can be quite a repetitive process, right? So that's why usually you might choose to use plugins for it instead, right? So because you're going to do a lot of work creating the styles by yourself. I'm going to click on create style. So if I select this, you're going to see that I have display large, display medium, and display small, all under the folder called the display. Right? So that is what the forward slash helped me to do. You can simply create random styles called display large, display medium, display small, but we're trying to arrange our content. We're trying to arrange our styles. So that's why I put all of them in a bigger folder called display. So for this, I'm going to do this. This will be my heading, right? So I'm going to make this, let's say, starting from 32 for my heading. Starting then this is 24, and this is to make this 28. 28 is not here. I can simply text 28. So this is my heading text. So doing the same thing as before, I'm going to go to style, click here, create style. So I'm going to now start with heading, then the forward slash. This is my heading large, right? I have my heading large, I have my heading medium. I have my heading medium. Right? So this is, I have to remember my forward slash. So now if you click here, we're going to see that now it's under a folder called heading, right? So what this helps you to do is, let's say I take this, right? I'm working with this typography, I'm working with this text. So I've clicked on, let's say, like we used before, this is success. So now I want this congratulations, you did it, to be smaller than the success, right? I want this. I'm just going to click on. So now it's the same text with the same style attached to it, right? But because we have created a style and it's universal, you can just come to the typography menu and we go down to heading and I go to heading menu, heading medium, right? So it reflects immediately, right? So the same thing as before. If I decide to call this is heading medium, and I go to the original component, right? And I go to this, and I click on to edit style. I make this 50. So now all styles that has all element that has that style affected in it would be affected by that change. It's universal, right? So that is whole how we do, that's the whole concept. You need to click on Control Z to undo that. So you can also continue to do this and go to. So let me create the last one before I move over to colors, right? Mhm. So now if you notice this typography system, we're just focusing on the size. You can also focus on the thickness and the weight, right? So it depends on the system you want to use. So now I want this same heading. Let me detach. So you can detach a style, right? I detach this style. So now I want this text to be 32 pixels. I want it to be popping. I want this exact same setting as my heading large, but I want my text to be bolder. So semi-bold. So this is what I want, right? So I can also create a style of it. So I can simply name this heading large, bold. You can just simply put P. Then the other one can be medium, right? So just different ways to show your style, all that. Okay. So now also if you come to our default Figma menu, you're also going to see the styles reflected here. So we can see the display here, can see the headings here that we just created to display these headings. Can delete this. So this was the one we just created. The display and the heading plugin, like the one I showed us before, the type skills. So when I click on type skills, I'm currently selecting, let's say I'm selecting the heading, 32 pixels of the heading, right? So now in this type skill system, so my base size, what do I want my base size to be? My base size to be 16. So I want to start from 16 pixels. want my line height to be 1.5, my scale, major third. So we talked about golden ratio of how things that are things in nature are usually in multiples of 1.0, 1.309. So that is where your scale comes into play. Some people would pick the golden ratio, but sometimes it's too perfect, right? So there's some they say there's something called beauty in imperfection. So the one that's usually preferred is the major third scale, 1.25. That it means that it's going to increase your type scale in multiples of 1.25, right? Multiples of 1.25. I can have scales. I want two scales up and two scales down. And so once I click on generate, it has created a typography system for me. Right. So I do not have to do all this that I was doing. Now this is 61, this is 49, this is 39, this is 31, this is 25, this is 20, this is 16, this is 13, this is 10. Right. So this is not perfect because first of all, it's not in multiples of 8 or 4 like I would have preferred. So you can still come in here and touch it up. 64 instead of 61, changes to 61, 64, right? So we have 49 here instead of 56. So we can change it to 56 or 48 rather. So now once you're done making all those changes, the only thing that is left for you to do is just simply click on this and make it a style, right? Click on plus, then give it whatever name you choose to give it. So that's how we work. That's how we create a typography style that is universal and we can use ever in our design system. So just going to delete this, right? Now in color works in much the same way. So now in typography, while we are focused on display, heading, paragraph, and caption. So so if you want to complete this typography system, you'll also create the different sizes for paragraph and the different sizes for your caption and also make it a style. And so the same thing with color. We're going to, for colors now, if you remember from the class part on colors, you have your primary color, your secondary color, you have your background color, you have your error colors, right? So let's say your primary color is purple, your secondary color is white or gray, whatever shade of gray or black, right? But there's some instances in your design where you have to use things like red, things colors like blue or green. Green to show confirmation, red to show an error message, um, yellow to show pending. And so sometimes we have to inculcate that use these colors in our designs, though they are not actually part of our brand colors, our brand identity. But we have to ensure that we are putting all of them in our design system. So same thing with this. I'm going to get Right, so you can do this manually. There are different ways you can create your color. You can simply put an ellipse, right? So usually in creating a color system, you have your color. You have probably decided on the color you're using for your brand or a particular hex code that you want to use for your design project, right? But what you're supposed to do here in creating a color design system is to create multiple variations of it, right? To give it shades to give you more room to choose and select which colors you're using. So, so most times it's best to stick to 10. It's best to stick to 10 colors of which your the main color you are selecting is the middle color. Right, so now let me, a simple example is, let's say choose, I choose green. So now this is my brand color. This green is my brand color. So I want to have five colors that are like five lighter shades of green and five darker shades of green because of different use cases and different situations where I might need them. So usually how we name this, we're going to name this green 100, green 200, green 300, green 400, green 500, green 600. I think this should be out. So 500 is usually the main color that you're working with, right? So 600, 700, 800, 900. And 1000 probably, or you might just stop at 100. Okay, so now this is my fill color, this is my hex code. I'm going to copy this. How we can actually, you can decide to create your color palette manually, but I have shared different resources and sites where you can create color palettes from. There's also a plugin that we used before called Color Foundation Generator, where you can get different shades and variations of your color or the shade you're working with, right? But to do it by yourself, we're going to get our color hex code. So this is our hex code now. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to go here. That is we have gone one step behind it. That's one step lighter. So we want a color that is one shade lighter than our current brand color. I'm going to paste this here, Control V. I'm going to click on the fill option so that I can adjust the color here. So I have the hue, saturation, and the brightness, right? So currently the hue is at 154 when we are not touching the hue. Because if you remember, I told you the hue the real color, is the pure color, right? Saturation and brightness, we can adjust to. So for saturation, I'm going to make saturation, it's currently 94, I can make it 84, right? And make the brightness 68, right? So if you can look closely and you see what happens. So now we have a lighter erosion because we reduce the saturation and we increase the lightness. So the same thing, I can also do the same thing for here. I'm going to collect this. I'm going to copy the hex code of this. Control C. I'm going to go here. Control V. I'm going to paste it. Right. So I go into the options in here. Then I can also reduce saturation again to 74. Make the lightness, I can increase the light brightness to 78. Yeah, so this is lighter. So we can see that is how you're going in the lighter direction. So if you want to make this darker, we will do the same thing here. I'm going to get this, Control C, and put this here. So working with the same color, right? Then we're going to adjust the saturation and the lightness. We're going to make it darker. It's currently 56. We're going to make this 40, right? So it's already darker. I don't even have to do much. Make this in 45, right? So that is how that can be done. So I can simply name all this in 100, 200. Let me just go here. 100. So right now, so I can just, let's say I want to work with this for, so this is my green 100, 200, 300, 400. So just in increasing order of, now to make a style out of this. So remember, like we said before, you can create a color style, you can create a text style, you can create a layout style and a grid style, right? So we want to create a color style out of the same way we created a text style for the typography. What we're going to do here, we're going to click on this color. Same thing, we're going to click on this, right? So that the same elements, we're going to click on plus. Then I'm going to name it primary because this is the primary color now. I put primary, then my forward slash, then I'm going to name it green. And also add my forward forward slash if I want to. So I want to make a color green. Well, I'm just going to write green 100, right? That's what I just want, right? So I'm going to create a folder primary and a color green 100. I'll do the same thing for this primary. Okay, so this is green 200. So I'll create this tile now. Alright, so now the second one has been created. So that's how you do it for 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is the way you create it manually, but like I said before, we have plugins for this, right? Now this is the main color we started with, this green 300, right? Now we're going to go to our plugins and we're going to go to foundation generator. So foundation color generator. I'm going to click on it, right? And allow it to load. Okay, so this is the foundation generator now. So now there are some things that we saw here before when I used it before that we did not understand. But after talking about design systems, I think we can better grasp what they mean. Right. So now if you come to profiles, we saw orbits, there's Atlassian, there's material, and there's ant design. So all these are design systems. Right. These are design, like I told you, there are some leading design systems, right? Because they have been acknowledged worldwide as something that works fine. We know Google is a very big company, right? So, and their design system is material design system. We have Atlassian, we have Orbit, and we have Ant. So this color generator generates color for you using the using that design system basically. Probably their variations, the variations of their colors and all that. So now if I get my color, this is my brand color green, my brand green, right? I'm going to use Orbit. I'm going to change this color to green. Color is already there. So this is my green color. But I do not want this. I want, let's see, affiliation. I want, yes, this is material design. So if you can see the naming convention that I use is the naming convention of material design. That's Google Design System. So everything is just related. We use what works. We do not really try to reinvent the wheel and all that, right? So now this is purple, but my brand color is green. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to paste it here. Control V. I'm going to click enter. So now it has generated the colors for me. So we have the green 50, 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 700, 800, 900. So in exactly the same way I was creating this one is the way this one has been created for me. So now I can either decide, tell them to, okay, now I've gotten my color palette, I have my color variations, and I can create a palette out of this, or I can create the style immediately, like instantaneously. It's just going to create the style for me. I can create palettes. When I click on palette, it's going to give me a palette like this, right? So this is the palette I got, right? This is my green colors. And if you look close, you're going to see everything about the green. You're going to see the hex code, the red, green, and blue. That's the RGB color scheme. So is, uh, this is all the colors, right? But it just gave me the color as a palette. You can see there's a pop-up that says 10 styles created. And now if I go to my style section, right, under foundation, I can see that green has been created. So this is it, green, the green I just created now. Right, so now I have a random, a gray circle. I can click on this styles. Then I go to foundation and I click on green 500, right? I come here, I click on green 400, just a little bit lighter. So that's just that for creating styles for your colors, right? So you can do the same thing for your secondary, your background, your error and success colors, and your black and white colors, right? It's going to do the same thing for you when you're creating your color styles, right? So, like I said before, in styles, we have the text, your color, your effect styles, and your layout guide styles. For effects now, usually in effect, what we're thinking about is things like shadows, right? So I go to you have your stroke, you have your effect, and you have the option to export. So if I click on effects now, I click on add effects or I click on apply styles. So I'm going to click on add effects, right? It's by default, it's going to give me a drop shadow. That's added a drop shadow to my circle, right? I click on it, but there are other options. You can have a layer blur, a background blur, a noise, effects, texture effect, and shadows, inner shadows or drop shadow, right? So usually in design, the most common effect that we use is the drop shadow. That's the shadow effect. Right? Sometimes we can create a system out of this. So let me draw a rectangle now. So usually we going to make this 12. Right? So I'm going to make this white. I'm going to make it pure white. Right? It's so pure that you can't even like you can't see, you can barely see it because the background is also white, right? But adding an effect, a drop shadow, kind of elevates it. You can now see that it's on top of the background, right? So now I might try to make my drop shadow smoother. So currently the position is at Y4. So Y is your Y axis and X is your X axis. If I make this 24, you can see that the shadow expands along the Y axis. Then same thing with blur. I can make my blur 20. So blur makes your shadow look smoother, right? I'm going to make this, I'm going to reduce this to 12. I'm going to make my spread 16. So spread, like the name implies, it simply spreads out your shadow, right? So means it is too much. I'm going to make it 4. Right. So and my color, currently my color, the color of my shadow is 25% opacity of black. So sometimes you can even make your shadow red, right? So just depends on what you're working with. So this is my shadow, right? But let me change this to black. Just simply go here and I'm going to change this to black. Right. Right now, so these are two different shadows, right? So I might decide, okay, I want to use this shadow for icons. I want this shadow for cards. And so depending on the hierarchy of my text, my different use cases for different shadows, but I want it to be consistent. Remember, I told you we create design systems so we can be consistent. We can consistently keep using the same things, right? It's reusable. So I can create a style out of this. I simply go to apply style and create. I'm not going to call this card shadow. So I can call this card shadow. I can call it shadow 100. I can call it shadow 200. Just anything I choose. My naming convention is for myself since I'm the designer working on it. Right, shadow 2. You can also add a description if you choose to. You need to create a style. Right? So now, if I have any text, any shape at all, so I have this circle here now. I can click on effect, right? I'm going to add card shadow. It has added that shadow in for me, right? I'm going to change it to, let's say, shadow 2. It has put in that shadow for me. That's what how a design system helps you. So even if I'm not using this, I'm not copying, I don't have to copy this shadow or this effect setting anymore. I can simply access it from the design system I've created. That's the style I created. That's all for shadows. Another thing we can also create as a style is also the grid. That's the layout grid. So like I talked about before, click on F to get your frame. We have the phone frame. I'm going to get my iPhone 13 mini. I'm going to put it in here. Make it a bit darker so we can see it. Right? So now this is my mobile frame. I can also put in my desktop frame. So desktop, I'm going to use 140 times 1004. I'm going to bring this here. I'm going to make it same gray color as this. Right now. So now for my grid system, we've talked about grid. Remember, it's also respecting the 16, 8, and 4 point system. So now I'm going to go to my layout guide and click on add layout guide. So it's going to give me a grid. I'm going to change this to columns like we've done before. My count is going to be 6, could be 5. I need to make my margin 16. Your margin can also be 24. I'm going to make my quarter 24 or 16. It's currently at stretch and the color is red. I can also change this to like blue so it's more obvious. I'm going to make my count 5, right? Now, once I add, this is my grid now, and I want to ensure that this grid system will be applied to every single screen I'm designing for this project, right? So I'm going to make this grid system a style. So at any time I create a frame or import a frame, I can simply apply this grid to that frame to ensure that my spacing is following the 4-point system or the 8-point system, right? So I'm going to click on this grid to make it a style. I'm going to call it mobile grid. So create style. Mhm. And also, this is just the grid system, as simple as that. So now for the desktop, same thing. I go to my effect, or rather my layout guide. I click on add, change it to columns. I change the count to 12, make my margin 100, right? Make my gutter 32, also be 24. Just if you notice, all the sizes I'm using are respecting the 8-point system. I'm going to also change this color to blue, right? So it's consistent with the previous one. I'm going to make it a style. I'm going to click on apply style and add plus to make it a desktop grid. So I'm going to click on create style. So now I'm done with this, right? So now wherever I go to, let's say I go here, somewhere random, I click on frame, I add a desktop frame. This is my desktop frame now, and I want to apply that exact grid I used previously because it's the same design, so it should be respecting the same grid. I simply go to my layout guide, I click on apply style, and I click on desktop grid, and it applies itself, as simple as that, right? That is how we create styles for our layout guide. Okay, we rarely use roles, to be honest. We rarely use roles in design, but situations where you have to use roles are very compact designs, like a dashboard, right? So when you know you're working, probably if you have seen a very complex dashboard with analytics and all that, might have to use roles, but you usually do not need roles in design. Hmm. But if you want to add it, you can add it. Let's add it. You can add it, right? But mostly we are concerned with the horizontal spacing. So I can also create this out. This is my grid, my desktop, and this is my mobile grid, right? So now we've created for typography, we've created for color, we've created for shadow, we've created for grid, right? So all this, we created them using by applying styles. But for things like buttons, when it comes to buttons, input fields, and checkboxes, how we create our design system is by making it a component. What we did here, exactly what we did here, right? I'm going to get this. So all this button is already a component. I'm going to get a button now. Control C. I'm going to go here and paste this Control V. This is my button, right? But I'm going to detach it from this because because it's purple, we already know that this is a component. That means it belongs to a particular family, and we are trying to work on something new. So I do not want it to be part of that family. So I can simply go here and click on detach instance. So what it's going to do is to just simply remove it from that component family. And you can see that the color now is blue instead of purple as before. So right now, so now this is a normal button, right? So now, like in typography, in typography, where I told you that you need to have your display text, your heading text, your paragraph text, your captions, your label text, background, error and sources, black and white. There are different ways you can section or group your colors. There are different ways you can section and group your typography. Just find the one that works best for you, that is very encompassing. The goal is to ensure that the goal is to ensure that there is no time or there's no point while designing that you have to use a color or a font that is outside your design system. You have to ensure that it is universal. It's encompassing every single scenario, every single use instance, right? So the same thing with buttons. I'm going to get this text, Control C, Control C. Okay. So like from the example we used previously, if you remember from the typing, buttons have different states, right? So apart from having different states, you're going to have different use cases. So you have your primary buttons. So let me name this primary. So usually we're going to have primary buttons, secondary buttons, tertiary buttons, which is also known as ghost buttons, right? So we have different variations or different instances of buttons because we are trying to ensure that the main button or the primary button is what is catching our user's attention. Like I've said, the CTA is one of the most important parts of your design, especially when you're working with websites and you're trying to get people to do something. That's what the button helps you to do. So imagine two buttons with the same thickness, with the same color, and with the same um presence, being side by side, right? So it's not pointing your user in the direction you want it to be. That's why we tend to use different variations or different um, button types, right? So now if you look at this fitness app we created previously, we have the start now and we have the download app, right? So these are two different buttons but with different colors. One is orange and more shouty, and we have the download app, which is less prominent. So this one is probably the secondary, first the primary button, and this is the secondary button, right? So it's not, we have to, so for this use case, we also have to define our buttons beforehand. Have to define our buttons beforehand, right? So now we can have, usually our primary button would most probably be with our primary color, right? If you have a secondary color, sometimes your secondary button would be with your secondary color, right? Or it could just be an outlined button. Right now, so you can see this they are both using the primary colors, but one is more prominent than the other, right? So these are different ways you can show the different level of importance of your button. You can also have a tertiary button. So sometimes I'm sure you have seen a button that does not have a border, right? So the button is just a text. I can also still come and underline this. So to underline something in your Figma, you can simply go to your typography You're going to see your normal typography properties, your alignment. Then you're going to see an option for more settings, right? So click on more, and you're going to see alignment again. You're going to see decoration. Now in decoration, you're going to see underline. You're going to see strike through. So we want to underline this. I'm going to underline. So for underline, you can also decide on the underline thickness, right? So I'm going to thicken this a little. So I'm going to make it 12, or if that is too thick, probably 8, right? So now this is my primary button, this is my secondary button, and this is my tertiary button. So simply looking at it, you can see that it has this a declining level of importance, or this declining level of prominence in the buttons. So, but apart from simply having your primary, your secondary, and your tertiary button, you can have different button states. So like we prototyped before, sometimes when you hover on a button, like simply hovering on it, the color can change. When you click on the button, the color might change. Sometimes when a button can be disabled. So these are the different options that we have to account for when also creating our design system. So now I would start with so now I have this page. I want to account for my default, my hover, my press. So default is when like when I just come into a page and I see the button, that's it, its default stage, right? I also have to click on the button. I have disabled when the button cannot be clicked. Right? So those are all the states that I have to account for, right? So as this is different from the use case, such as the primary, secondary, and tertiary. This is now the states, different states that the button can exist in. Right? So now I can come here and I can duplicate this. Right, so I might make this a bit darker. Right, so I want that when I hover on this button, when I hover on it, it turns a bit dark to show that I am hovering on it. Right, so when I press it, so let's say when I press the button, let's say it becomes a bit lighter, right? A bit lighter, or probably when I press the button, it has a shadow, something like that. We'll work the shadow. So now I'm going to make my shadow a bit green. That is too much. So 20. I'm going to reduce the blur to 20 or to 10 rather. Just to be more compact. Right. So I want when I press my button, it gets a drop shadow rather. It becomes lighter and has a drop shadow. So when I disable it, so simply for disable, the common color we use is gray. So I'll simply add a gray color here. So this is my disabled state for this button. So this is my disabled state. Also for the secondary button, I'm also going to do the same thing for it. right? So let me just simply do that as quickly as possible. So now these are my four different states from my secondary. I have my default, hover, my pressed, and my disabled, right? I think this should work better for hover. You're being all right now. So I can. So now I've created all this, right? But I'm just creating it. I'm not making it universal. Remember, we're trying to add this to our design system and to work with buttons, to include buttons in your design system. You have to make a component, right? So usually what we would have done, the way we did this previous one before, was to simply make this a variant. Right? So for the variant, I'm not going to change the color to this, right? I'm going to call this hover, because this is the hover state. I'm going to change this to state, right? So this is hover and this is the default, right? So this is in terms of state. You have the button, you have the hover. I'm going to, if I duplicate this, just pardon my demonstration, and I change the color to this one for the pressed, right? Can also copy the drop shadow. I come here to drop shadow. That's the effect. I click on Control C to copy it. And I come in here and I click on this, click on Control V to paste in that drop shadow. And I delete this, right? So now I have this. Let me bring it out so we're not confused, right? So this is my component I just created. This is my default. If you look here, see default. This is my hover and this is my pressed. Right? So that is the way we would have done it manually. That is the way we would do it manually. I would also create another one again, Control D on my disabled, right? But instead of going through this process of going through doing all that when we have already created these buttons already, right? So we do not have to start working and creating them again all over. What I can simply do is I'm just going to select everything here. One, two, three, four. Select all of them and make a component set. So I'm not saying create components. I'm saying create a component set. The component set ensures that all elements in that set are variants of the other. So I'm going to click on see if I hover on this, I'm going to see create component. I'm going to click on the drop down. I'm going to click on create component set. So not create component, not create multiple component, but create component set. So click on create component set. So I'm going to create a set of for all these for me. I'm going to click on each of them. This is default. I'm going to click on this. It's also default. So I'm now going to rename it. It's my job to rename this now. I'm going to click on this. I'm going to rename this to press. I'm going to click on this and I'm now going to rename it to disabled. Now this is now my component set, right? My component set. So now at let's say I'm working with this over button. So I bring it in here. I'm working with this currently, but now I want the press speed. I can simply go to my properties panel and click on the drop down here and click and change it to pressed and change it to disabled, right? So I think the way everything just works in your favor when you are using a design system or a component rather. This is pressed, right? So depending on the situation or the use case, I can change. So I'm going to go here. I need to change the property to state, right? Because that is the state. Hmm. So we have created the first one for this. So I can enlarge this, right? Hmm. So I'm going to shift this down. Hmm. So now we must all remember now that these buttons we just created now, that's the default, the hover, the press, and the disabled. They are all for the primary buttons, but we have secondary buttons and we have tertiary buttons. So we want to account for the state and the use case in the same component. I hope I'm not confusing someone because it can get a bit confusing. I'm going to do now is I'm going to push this out because anything I create inside this purple bounding box is a part of the component set. So I'm going to click on the component set. I'm going to click on properties to add, to create property. So am I adding a text, a boolean, an instance swap? I'm adding a variant, another variant property. Remember, this is variant we are creating. I'm adding a variant, and property I want to add is the use case. So create property, right? Create property. Yeah. So now, if you click on this button, that's the default. So the state now is default. The use case is also default. So now the use case of all these buttons in here is primary. So we're going to change that to primary. So I should have done, let me click on add variant value primary name use case. All right, so it might be a bit complex at first, but over time I'm going to get familiar with this. I'm going to expand this, right? So I'm going to definitely bring this button in here. Okay, so now I'm going to duplicate this. C. Copy properties, right? I copy the properties, I come here, I paste the properties, right? Right, so now I have created another, I have duplicated the secondary buttons inside that component set, right? So in an ideal scenario, when we are creating the component set with the primary buttons, you should have added the secondary buttons, right? But I was trying to show us some. So now I have this and this and this and this, right? But if you notice, if you look at your properties panel, you're going to see that it says that the properties and values of this variant are conflicting. Why? The reason why is because for this now, we have the state, that's default, and the use case primary. We have not created a use case secondary, that is the secondary button. I'm going to put this here. I'm going to click on this. I'm going to click on all four of them and change their use case to secondary, right? Because they are all secondary buttons. Okay. So now they're all secondary buttons, and also this is default. This should be hover, this should be pressed, and this should be disabled. So I'm going to also change that. All right, so I do not know if that was confusing, but let me show you what we just did. So this is still the variant, right? So now this is my primary button. So if I look in here, I'm seeing my use case is primary. This is my primary button, and what state is it in? It is currently pressed, right? But now I want my secondary button, click on secondary, and I want the state to be default. So I get my secondary button, right? So this is what we have just done. Now maybe I want my secondary button, the pressed one. I want my secondary button, the hover one, right? If I do not want this, I can simply go to my primary button. I want my primary button to hover. This is the hover of my primary button. So that is what we just did here, right? So I can just delete this. So same thing, same thing. We can also create for the tertiary. We're going to duplicate this. Then we're going to remove the stroke, right? And we're going to narrow down to the text and underline it because that's our secretary button that we created. That's our underline. And we're going to increase the thickness to 8. That's our tertiary button. I'm going to make more room for it. I'm going to move this down and move this up. Right. So now for the use case, now I'm going to also change it. My use case, I'm going to now change it to tertiary. So now I can also come back to this button I have here. And I said, okay, I want a tertiary button. I click on tertiary. And it is converted as easily as that. Right, so this is just a simple button design system, but a button design system can be way more complex than that because sometimes you have to account for bigger buttons, medium buttons, smaller buttons. So the same way we had medium text, small text, and large text. You can also have medium buttons. So as I've created two different properties for this button, I've created the use case as the primary, secondary, and tertiary. I've created the state. You can also create another one called size, where you're going to have medium, large, and small, right? So those are different ways we can create our button. So now after that, We also have our spacing and our input field. So spacing is not very complex, right? So spacing is not a very complex design system to create. We already know we are working with a 4-point spacing. It's as simple as drawing a box, a small box, and probably giving it your width of 8. And so I'm going to make this red. So we usually call this the red box system. So I gave this 8 and 8. So this is my spacing. Right, so this can simply be my spacing design system, right? But usually you do not really need to create this because you might not really need it, right? So simply using your alt on your keyboard, you can check the spacing between elements in your design system. Right, so this is currently 51. I adjusted it to 40, and that's what that, right? So now in my design system, if I have this is just you usually have to name this, right? Going to put it is 8 pixels. Now, so let's say this is my spacing system, and I simply let me copy this 40 pixels, and I go back here. So right, like Control V. If I bring in these 40 pixels, it should smoothly fit into this space in here. You can see it is touching both borders, which shows that the space between these two elements is 40 pixels, right? So usually you can decide to color code it. Maybe this is red, this is blue, this is purple. So once you see a purple color in any part of your design system, you know that this is 40 pixels spacing. Right. So some people decide to use this if this is better for you and if it keeps you consistent. Or you can simply use Alt, right, to ensure that your spacing is always in multiples of 8 or 4, depending on what system you're using. So we have talked about spacing. Now you have input fields, right? So sometimes we do create design system for input fields because it's something you would have to get information from your users at whatever point in time, be it the sign up, be it login, be it in maybe their review. Maybe it's an e-commerce platform and you want them to drop in a review for you. So if it involve them imputing something, it's an input field you're using, right? So usually, like I said, I talked about the skeletal structure of input fields. right? I'm just going to bring this here. Right, so usually your input field just it should just have a title, that's the label, and the text field. It's as simple as that. So let me just work on something very simple. I'm going to remove the fill. I'm going to add a stroke. Right, I'm going to make the stroke 2 pixels so it's bolder. I'm going to round it a bit, 4 pixels or more. I'm going to make this a bit bigger. Right. Okay. Usually your input field should not be less than 40. The minimum size of your input field should be 40. So just you can find a place to write it. You can write it down. The minimum size of your input field should be 40. And the minimum height rather should be 40. 40. Hmm. So I guess I'm zoomed out a lot. Right? Let me make this 44 so it's a bit bigger. Make this 1.5 or even 1. I'm going to make this 12. Okay, so this is my label, this is my input field, this is my text field. I'm going to click on both of them, and as always, I click on Shift A to group both of them, right? To check the spacing between them, I'm going to make it 8. I can either go here and change this to 8, right? Or I can simply click on it itself here and change it to 8, right? So now, usually you have your label, you have your text field, and you would have your, sometimes you might have an additional text. Right, so I'm just going to click on duplicate this, I'll bring it down. I'm going to align it to the left. So if you've ever seen this forgot password at this side, so this is how your input field could look like. So this is optional, it's not always there. So sometimes you can see that this would be switched off, right? So this is how your input field usually looks. Yeah, this is a simple example of an input field, right? So we're almost we're out of time. Now next session we're going to complete this input field with the radio, with the checkbox and radio button. Then we're going to design something with this design system we have just created. And we're going to design something and see how it looks, right? What of placeholders? Yes, exactly. Yeah, thank you so much for reminding me. Yeah, yep, that is true. I forgot that an MPI, your text field, inside your text field, you should have a placeholder, right? That is very correct. So to do that, you can. So how you create placeholders is simply you have your rectangle, that is your text field, and you have your text, right? You need to simply group them or click on Shift A like always. Okay, if you click on sheet A, it's currently aligned to the middle, right? It's at the middle, but I want it to be at the left, to be left aligned. So I'm going to click on align left, right? I'm also going to make this 16 pixels to respect that um to respect the grid system we are using, or the spacing system we are using. So usually for your placeholder text, to ensure that your user knows that it's a placeholder and not a real text, usually gray it out. So it shouldn't be pure black. It shouldn't be black at all. It should be a light gray, right? A light gray. You as light as this, right? And we can also make it not bold but regular. Make this a bit darker. So now I'm going to copy this. The reason why our text is currently doing that is because it has a fixed width, but right? But once I'm going to make the width auto width, that it encompasses whatever we're texting. So I'm going to make this a password, right? So this is what it's supposed to look like, right? So you would still have to make this a component, right? Make this a component because there might be different input state. There's the default, there's the hover, there's the active, there's an input field that is disabled. There's even an error input field where the color of the text field is no longer black but might be red, along with an error message. Those are, there are different states and different use cases, right? So now next class we're going to continue from here. We're going to make this a component and walk through the different states of the input fields. We're also going to work on the checkboxes. I spelled check wrong. Nobody told me. Right? So checkbox, right? And radio button. So yeah, that's all for today's session. Right? So I'll see us all on Monday. Are there any questions? So just I would advise you just take design, start replicating them, try your hand with Figma, get familiar with it, create components, create variants, because this is what helps us in prototyping, right? Because now I want to prototype my hover state. I just have to link this to this and click on hover as my interaction. So just get familiar with this. Also go through the design systems that I shared in the slides. Look at how how they or elements that they are creating in their design system, or elements that they are adding in their design system. Look at the different states, the different ways the buttons can be, right? Even icons should also be here, right? So we have an icon, our icon pack in here, but you can also create different states for it, right? So yeah, so that's all for today's session. I will see us on Monday. Have a nice weekend, right? So if you have any questions, just drop it in the comment section, right? So drop it in the comment section and tag me or tag the mentor so we can attend to it, right? So good night, everybody, and have a nice weekend. Good night.